to the Residential Tenancies Housing Emergency Measures in the Public Interest Amendment Bill 2016 first stage, and I call on Deputy Brid Smith to move for leave to introduce.
I move the bill. Mullum an bille Shirton Doyle, an bille Tionok Dear Conaha, Barta, Tehirta, Egg Donala, Wahal Las and Fubble, Lasu Gavila Shejeg. The Residential Tenancy Housing Emergencies Measures in the Public Interest Amendment Bill 2016. I want to highlight the main points and the purpose of the bill, because whatever happens today with Minister Coveney's bill, the issue of rents and the conditions of tenants living in the private rental sector and the housing crisis in general will not be dealt with by this government or its Fianna Fáil subsidiary. It can't be, because the only solution they have is the market and an ideologically driven reliance and faith on and intimate connections with the developers and landlords. Therefore, this crisis will grow, and the uncertainty and injustice of homelessness, rising and unaffordable rents will continue. This bill is titled the Housing Emergency Measures in the Public Interest, in short HEMPI, and it is deliberately playing on the previous bill, which was brought in by the previous government, known as HEMPI, which is to draw a direct parallel with that legislation, the longest emergency legislation measure in the history of this state since World War II, and it continues to be used against public sector workers. It does not purport to be the final answer or the complete piece of a jigsaw, but it does two simple things, and to show that with the political will, both are possible and imminently sensible. It will, in designated areas, reduce rents to levels they were at the end of 2011. This would give immediate relief and breathing space to thousands of tenants who are spending 50% and more of their disposable income on keeping a roof over their heads. It is a just and rational measure, and that is constitutional language to say it is just and rational and proportionate. Wages, the consumer price index and average earnings have not increased by the degree that rents have since 2011. The estimated CPI since 2011 is a cumulative about 3.1%. Average rents have not risen nationwide by 3.1% since 2011, but by a great deal more, and in other areas one estimate is they have risen by 60% in parts of Dublin during this time. In comparison, wages have stagnated and have fallen as taxes, universal social charge and cuts to pay off bankers' debts were placed on the shoulders of ordinary people and workers. To those, and specifically to those in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and their legal advisers, and to the army of commentators and economists who will swoon at the prospect of actually reducing rents, I want to say this. This bill shows that it is perfectly possible within the Constitution to seek to interfere with property rights when faced with a crisis of the scale of this housing crisis. The bill is in essence a replica of the logic and the argument used by those parties when pushing the HEMPI legislation, that there is an emergency, it requires emergency measures for the public good and in the interests of social justice. Then the crisis was a crisis of bankers, and measures were so posed to place the burden for the recklessness and greed of a few onto the backs of the many. As a direct result of that crisis, we inherited a housing crisis of enormous proportions. This bill simply says there is now an even greater emergency, and we will take steps to reduce rents and stop the grounds for a landlord terminating any tenancy while that emergency continues. To say to those who say that it is unconstitutional, I say it is not. It is robust constitutionally, as much as the HEMPI legislation was. It has reviews, it has mechanisms for submission, and even at its most restrictive, allows for returns to landlords to ensure their viability. What it won't do, and what it will stop, is obscene profiteering by one section, the landlord and corporate sector, at the expense of ordinary people. The situation where people face economic eviction and live in terror of the next rent rise, while, for example, a company like Green REITs boasts a 17% return and a €150 million profit, that will not be acceptable. That will be challenged by this bill. The right of the landlord to use a multitude of grounds for termination, not, I should say, the obvious ones of non-payment or antisocial behaviour, but the host of other reasons that they use will be stopped and restrictions placed on them. evicting in order to sell a dwelling or to move a family member in, or to change a business or to renovate. This bill will not accept that tenants can be thrown on the side of the road in the middle of the state's worst housing crisis. For example, in 2011, the average rent in Dublin City was €110 a month. By this year end, they hit €1,575 a month, and that is only the average. This bill is a modest proposal that will see the rent set at about €1,050 a month, with a margin of 5%, which will allow for renovations, etc. It is a modest proposal, and despite the hysteric claims of some that landlords will flee this country or that the rental sector will be devastated, I want to say that this is nonsense, and I want to move this bill and propose it to the Dáil.
Is the bill being opposed? It's not being opposed. I ask the Deputy then, given